Welcome to this month's KeyShot webinar titled Creating Renderings and Interactive Visuals for Killer Portfolios. We chose this theme today because last week was the IDSA National Conference in Chicago. For those of you who are unfamiliar with IDSA, it is the the Industrial Designer Society of America. And many of those who are in attendance were industrial design students gearing up for back to school. So we felt this webinar would help motivate students to polish up a few projects before becoming too busy with new ones. So we have about 100 attendees in here. I was afraid that with many of the schools starting back up again this week that those students might not be able to attend, but remember, if you have to leave early at any time, a recording of the webinar will be available on KeyShot.com under Resources, Learning, and Webinars. So you'll be able to find this webinar as well as recordings of past webinars and tutorials and quick tips. So we've been creating some new tutorials lately, so keep an eye out for those. As you can see, they were mentioned on this month's newsletter. So this webinar will be directed at the industrial design industry, but the techniques that I'll be showing you today are very applicable to other industries such as automotive, engineering, and so forth. So my name is Rex Roberts, and I'm a digital media artist here at Luxion. I recently graduated in the spring from Cal State Long Beach with a degree in industrial design and a minor in marketing. We also have our marketing manager, Josh Mings, with us today, as well as our support guru, Bruno, and both of them will be monitoring and answering questions as we go along. So to understand our goal for today, let's take a look at some portfolios. So one of my favorite portfolio sites is Behance.net. This is a website in partnership with Adobe, so they've done a really nice job polishing off this interface, and we can go ahead and search for industrial design, and we can actually filter by the tools used. So let's take a look at some of the portfolios containing KeyShot renderings. So you can see that we have some nice glamour shots here, such as this watch, which I would say is comparable to the helmet rendering that you saw on the newsletter. Also have some nice automotive concepts, and you can see that it's typical that you'll have a nice glamour shot or beauty shot used as this thumbnail to help draw you in and gain some clicks. So let's take a look at one of the most appreciated projects here. So this was done by Matthew Chodo. Does a really nice job of explaining through text and images the context of the project, and really sets a tone. He used a nice KeyShot rendering as his thumbnail, goes through his process, some beautiful sketches, and brings it all together with a final rendering. So he's done this model in Rhino and rendered it in KeyShot. So this was more of the traditional type of rendering that you'll see. I think it works very well, partially because of the detail used in both the model and the texturing. Here you can see some subtle texturing in this upper, and he uses some very nice camera views to help communicate his story, as well as some text callouts to help that as well. Here we have some nice depth of field applied to this image, so really focuses the viewer on this tread, which he is talking about here in the call out. So you're not distracted by some of the other geometry here. and finally he brings it back to that thumbnail image in its full form, and it really has a nice mood and a nice tone. So let's take a look at another. This was one I thought was pretty interesting. It's a very simple call out, or a simple concept. And again, he uses some nice text callouts to explain the story of this project. Again, some nice detailing in the texture, these nice close-up views. So he does a really nice job here. And he takes it even a step further, and goes into some color, material, and finish explorations, and it appears that this was actually set up in KeyShot. So he got really creative with it. He actually modeled out some type of manufacturing application here and shows the first extrusion and the process of the manufacturing, and also packaging. So it really communicates the story of this product all the way through. So for today's webinar, I'm sharing with you one of my own projects, which is this helmet here. Let me bring up my, this was my senior show display board. So I'm not here to give you tips on really what makes a great portfolio. There are many people that are much better suited for that out there, design professionals that go through, you know, tens to hundreds of portfolios a week. So what I'm here to show you is just to demonstrate some techniques on how you can get started to polish up some of your own renderings to really bring your portfolio together. So here I chose to use the same glamour shot that you saw on the newsletter, and also some other shots to help explain the product. So with my product here, this is the kind of Arrow Road style helmet, and I've introduced some Arrow ear covers that have an audio insert. So I won't go into detail of the actual concept itself, but you can see that, you know, I use a variety of views and showing some more detailed shots of how the product is used. So I'll be going through the process of setting up this glamour shot, and later I'll set up a KeyShotVR and explain how the composition, materials, and lighting may differ from that of the glamour shot. So this was a model I created in SolidWorks, as you can see, and to ensure excellent surface quality when brought into KeyShot, go up to Options, Document Properties, and Image Quality, and I cranked up my resolution to the maximum value. So now I can be confident that when I bring my geometry into KeyShot, there won't be any visible tessellation. And this is very important when displaying your work. You want it to be the highest quality possible. So this might take a little longer to actually save the file, or to use the plugin to render it out and push it directly over to KeyShot. But it's definitely worth the wait, as once the model is in KeyShot, where larger data sets aren't a problem, you'll have that really high quality surfacing. So the benefit of using the direct plugin here is, of course, the live linking. So if I were to make updates to my geometry here in SolidWorks, I can update and it'll push those changes right over into KeyShot without having to reapply materials or lighting. But today I'm not going to be making any modifications, and not all of you are using SolidWorks. So let's jump into KeyShot and take a look at the direct importer. So for time's sake, I already imported my model into KeyShot, but if I were to drag and drop my solid part file, you can see this would be the dialog if I were to bring in another piece of geometry. So just like the plugin offers the update button, here if you just save your file with the same name, you can essentially do the same, use the same technique without having to use the plugin. So if you're not using SolidWorks or Creo or one of the softwares that we do offer the plugin for, you still have the ability to update your geometry. So in this case, I use keep original location and size, and I recommend to use keep original pretty much at all times unless you're working with a very large scale model such as architecture. Really the only benefit of working with the automatic size is that it makes the sliders a little more manageable, but using keep original makes sure that the textures are to proper scale, and we'll go into that a little later. So SolidWorks models in y-up coordinates, all of this looks good. So that's how I imported this piece of geometry. So as you can see, we have our shadow cutting through, and that's because I did import it at the keep original location. But in this case it's okay because I'll be disabling the ground shadows, as the helmet would just be floating in air. So let's go ahead and do that. Go to our Environments tab and just disable the ground shadows. Okay, so let's just go ahead and start applying materials. We'll open up our library. Well, actually first let me just quickly go over the UI in case some of you are new to KeyShot 4. So now we've introduced some docking windows. So we have our library, which contains all the predefined materials, colors, environments, backplates, textures, and so on. So from your KeyShot library, you'll be dragging and dropping these into the scene to see the real-time updates. Over here we have our project window, and we can actually swap the location of these two. I prefer to have my project window on the left. So in your project window you'll see your scene tree with your different parts. If you were to edit a material, you'll see that material's properties, the properties of the environment that are applied to the scene, your camera view, and your settings tab. So pretty basic stuff. Also remember, at any time you can press K to see the hotkey list, just to speed up the process a little bit, make you a little more efficient. So yeah, let's start applying some materials. We'll start with some plastics. We can either search for our plastic directly, or we can browse here in the library. So I'm going to look for some shiny hard plastics and drag it onto a scene. So you can see that all the materials are linked together, and that's because I didn't apply any appearance shaders in SolidWorks. So then what we want to do is select the top level hierarchy in our scene tree and unlink the materials. So now when we drag and drop a new material, we can see that the parts are now unlinked. So if we say we want to use this material, this black hard plastic, on the ear cover as well, we can use the hotkey Shift left click, Shift right click, and that will paste a linked copy of that material. So now if we were to make any adjustments to this material, such as increase the roughness, we can see that those two materials are linked together, as opposed to just dragging and dropping a new instance of that material. Now if we were to change the roughness, they are not linked. And a way to understand which materials are in the scene, you can go to your Scene tab and your Materials tab. This is your in-project material palette. So you can see all the different materials that are currently applied to the scene. And all of these blue plastics are not linked, although they are the same material. They're treated as separate materials because I did unlink all of them. So let me continue adding some more materials to my scene. For our ear cover, or our audio insert here, we'll use a polished chrome. Again, shift left click, shift right click. And actually I'm going to use a metal material for this visor or lens, and I'll go over why I'm using that a little later once I've applied the rest of the materials to the scene. I'm going to use the same shiny black plastic for this cord here. And I'm going to apply a rough plastic to these little accessory pieces. So just copying and pasting them over, making sure they're all linked together. And we can do that to our little headphone cords as well. So you can see that it's taking some time to res up on the inside here, which makes it a little difficult to apply materials and see what I'm doing. So if I go into performance mode, Alt-P, it clears things up a bit, disables the self shadows, and makes it a little easier to see what I'm doing here. So it looks like I accidentally applied this rough plastic to my foam core. So I'm actually going to unlink that material and double click to edit it. And I'm going to use a procedural texture to represent the foam core. So I have a rough plastic applied currently. Go over to my textures, and for the color I will select the texture type to be the leather procedural. I can hold Alt, click on color, and drag over to bump, and now I've just copied that texture to the bump. So then if I select to sync those two, now I can adjust the scale, and the color and the bump will be linked together. So find a decent scale for our leather texture here. And for this material type, I've found that for the color, it works best to keep these two colors very close together. So color 1 is the color of the peaks, which is the darker spots here, and color 2 is the valleys. So if we look at an example of this kind of foam EPS core, you can see that indeed the peaks are a little darker than the valleys are. So I'm going to turn this up to a 100% black and maybe 2% here. So the values are pretty close. Yeah, 2 looks good to me. So doesn't exactly look like EPS yet, so let's bring the bump height down slightly. And actually I'll make this 1% gray. Okay, so that's close enough for now. We can come back and edit that if we need to. I'm going to copy that and paste it over to the other side here. So now we have our foam core set up. We need to continue applying some of our materials. Let's find a fabric material for our strap here. Go into cloth and leather, maybe a nylon. So if we bring on, say, a white nylon, we can change the color, the diffuse color, to a black. And the specular color, for the most part, will always be a value of white or gray. The specular is actually the color of the reflections or highlights that you see on the material. So if I change this to a red, it totally changes the appearance of the material. So for most realistic, you want to have the specular to be a white or a very light gray. So it looks like we have to adjust the scale of our texture here. Go over to our Textures tab, and this is not a procedural texture, so we have a few more options here. We have it applied as a box map, which is probably okay in this case, because the wall thickness is not very big, and we shouldn't have to worry about seams. So we'll reduce our scale, maybe 0.05. And bring our bump height up a little bit. I'd actually like to increase the roughness too. Okay, so that'll be good for now. Let's continue copying over some of these materials. Now, I already have my materials applied to the shell here. So if we have our Scene tab open, we can see the object highlight taking effect. And we'll just select some of these materials and choose to hide them, so we have a little more visibility of what's going on in our scene and lets us apply materials a little easier. I'll use the same nylon material for our padding straps here. In the rendering, these straps aren't visible, so for now it's not hugely important, but if we were to do a detailed close-up view of the inside of the helmet, I might want to take a little more time to dial in those textures. I want this to be a white plastic, so I'll just unlink my material and change the diffuse to a white or a gray. I find that if you do make it a 100% white value, sometimes it can be a little blown out, especially when using a white background. So when using a white plastic, I usually use a very light gray value. So I'm gonna copy and paste my metal material to a few more parts here, and we're pretty close. So let's go over to our scene tab and look at our materials that we have applied to the scene. So I'm actually going to right click and select parts with material. So that'll select all the parts that I have that chrome applied to. Now I can hide that selection, and we can start hiding all these materials or all these parts that we already have materials applied to. And another way of linking materials is to actually drag and drop directly from your in-project material palette. So remember, I had a separate material for my lens, and that's because I'm going to be adjusting that later. So I want to find the metal parts. So this is the correct one, and I can just drag and drop from my material palette directly onto these parts to then link them together. For our earbud here, let's look for a translucent material. That'll do. And maybe for our power button, we can use an emissive. So it might be a little difficult to navigate around your scene, especially when in these close-up views. So what helps with that is using Look At. So if I press Control Alt left click and click on the part that I want to look at, it'll center that directly in my view. So now I can zoom in and out and pan around, and that part will always be in the view. Makes it a little easier to navigate. So let's change this to an emissive material to represent kind of a soft cast LED. Use a light blue value for that and copy and paste to that other part there. Okay. Bring our chrome. This should also be chrome, so let's make sure that's unlinked. Okay, so I think we're close enough for now. Let's go back and show all of our parts and see what we got. Okay, so like I said, for the lens, I'm actually using a metal material, and that's because I wanted to kind of mimic what Oakley is doing with a lot of their products. They have an iridium type lens, so if we look at their violet iridium, see, this is very close to the look that I was going for. Except in this case, it looks like the base color or diffuse color is a purple, and there's kind of a blue gradient, a radial gradient applied on the outer portion of that material. So I'm using the metal material to get that high level of reflectivity. For our color, probably want to use something similar to the color we're using for our helmet, so we can use our color picker and just select that color to keep those nice and consistent. And now I want to apply a radial gradient. So let's jump into Photoshop and quickly create a gradient. So I'm going to create a new document. It's important that this is a square document so it centers properly onto our part. So 1000 by 1000 pixels is fine. You can increase this, and KeyShot works very well with very high resolution images, 300 dpi, and we want our background contents to be transparent. And that's important because we want that diffuse color of the lens to show through. So what I'll do here is just set up some guides in the center of my document and let those smart guides snap into place, and choose the color that I want for my gradient, which is going to be a purple. And using the gradient tool, we can select dither, so that'll make for a much smoother gradient than just using the brush. So if I start from the very center of the document and drag it out, creates a nice radial gradient. So now we can go ahead and save this out. We want to save it as a PNG or another file type that supports transparency. So you can see I already have one saved in here, but we'll do it again. No compression. Okay. So now if we edit our material, we can go to our Textures tab, and you see I have my Finder window open, and we can just go ahead and drag this into the color swatch. So we're going to increase our scale, but since this isn't a square part, it's more of a landscape shape, I'm going to go ahead and just increase only one axis of the image. We'll turn off repeat, and actually instead of using box map, I will go to view, show my coordinate legend, and see what axis I would want to project this color map onto. So it looks like the Z axis, so we'll use planar Z mode, and then we can adjust our scale accordingly. So as you can see, that gradient is perfectly centered on that part, and that's because it was originally a square image. But I'm actually going to go in and edit the color, the diffuse color of this metal. You can see if we go back to our Properties tab, that color is no longer there. So what I want to do is just uncheck the color texture real quick. Then gives me the option to change my color. So I want something maybe a little lighter. Then we can go back and recheck our color, and it comes back. I think I like the original gradient I created a little better. Okay. So we're going to do something similar for the audio inserts. I'm going to add a bump map of the Giant logo. So for this project, I actually was lucky enough to have the lead frame and component designer of Giant as my mentors. So I used Giant as the brand for this Aero helmet. And I just found this logo online, searched Google Images. So I want to take this circular logo and create a bump map out of it. So I'll use my marquee tool. Again, want to make sure that this is a square document and crop. Okay. Use my magic wand just to select the areas that I want, and I'll press Ctrl J to copy just those selections. So now I have a transparent background and my logo. So when creating a bump map, it's important that we apply a small blur to the edge to get a nice effect. So we'll go up to Filter and Gaussian Blur, and that should be good. And we'll save that out as a PNG to retain that transparency. And actually in this case you could have a white background since it is just a bump map. So if I edit this material, which actually I think is linked to others, so I'll unlink that material, go back to edit it, go to my Textures tab, and just drag and drop my newly created texture. So similarly, we'll find which axis we want to project this on. So it looks like X, and we'll use our mapping tool and position that in the center of our part. So it looks like we need to reduce the scale, uncheck repeat, and actually the logo is backwards, so we'll flip that horizontally. We can continue to position interactively. Or just use the mapping tool. And select OK. So then you can adjust your bump height to find a reasonable value. But actually it looks here like we might have wanted to add a little more blur to the edges of that image there. So let me just replace this one with the one that I created before. Looks like it's giving the same effect, so this is okay for now. But yeah, to smooth that out a little more, you'd want to add a little more blur to that image. So we can copy and paste that to the other side. Then we want to unlink this material because we'll have to flip that horizontally. And just position it in the center of that part. Okay, so enough with materials for now. Let's jump into some lighting and some cameras. So for the hero shot, it's typical you'll see, a 3/4 view, a front or back. So in this case I'll use a front 3/4. Let's go to our camera tab. Start off with an inclination of 0. And when setting up this angle, there's a few things that I'm looking for. I want to communicate most of the geometry, or as much of the geometry I can. So maybe this vent that's being cut off, I want to show a little more of that. So maybe bring it up a little bit. And then this little cutout here, since we are using the metal and this isn't transparent, we might want to try and show a little less of that. And then we have this live hinge, or this button that would be used to remove the ear cover. So we definitely want to make sure that that is visible in our hero view here. And we'll just show that other ear cover poking down. So that looks good for now. Now, if I were to save this camera like it is, we might run into an issue later because we have not yet defined our image resolution. So yeah, if you are saving a camera, it might appear differently if you do end up locking your resolution. So this is actually something I like to do more towards the beginning. And in this case, we want to choose a resolution that's appropriate for our portfolio. So if we're going to be using this for print, then we might want to use something such as 8.5 by 11. So that way we know that it'll fit nicely onto that document. But in this case, we're using it for web. In the newsletter image, that was just a 1080p image, so I used 960 by 540, which is a ratio of 1080p. But actually, in this case, let's go back to Behance, and we'd like to use this kind of glamour shot as a thumbnail image on, say, our Behance portfolio. So we want to have full control of this image size. We want to make sure that none of our image is being cropped. So I'm just going to save out one of these thumbnails, and you can see the dimensions of this are 202 by 158. So then we can set this to 202, 158, lock that aspect, and now when we render this out for our thumbnail image, we have complete control of the dimensions there. We won't be cropping any of that image. So back to our cameras tab. We have our camera view set up here. Let's go ahead and save our camera. So when I save a new camera, since we do offer cameras and view sets, I just like to make note that this is a camera view and not a view set, so I'm not confused by it later. And once we set up the lighting and the environment, then I'll go ahead and save out a view set for this camera view. So that would be hero view set. So let's go ahead and start setting up some lighting. We'll get out of performance mode so we have a more accurate understanding of the lighting in the scene. So you can rotate your environment. This is more of the beginner techniques, just using the hotkey control and left click and drag will rotate your environment around. But in most cases, this startup HDR environment is not going to be appropriate for your model, especially in this case where we have a more dramatic kind of glamour shot. We want something with a little higher contrast and some more variation in tones. So let's look at some of the studio environments I have. So I like these overhead panels. This one has a nice gradient to it, nice contrast of light and dark tones. But if I bring it into the scene, it doesn't really show off the geometry yet. So a trick for those of you who have the HDR editor, you can actually take KeyShot's existing HDRs and pretty much create your own using the tilt and rotation functions. So we can just totally change up this environment to get something that's more appropriate for our model. You can see it has this nice white panel, so I want to find a good location for that so it reflects off that lens and gives that kind of similar effect to what Oakley is doing there. So might take a little time to figure out exactly what position you're looking for, but actually that looks pretty good. So I have the curvature following the curvature of the lens here on either side, and it's giving me some nice reflections. So we'll start with this as our base and then go ahead and add some pins to help pop out some of the rest of the image. So I want a similar kind of effect that you're seeing here on the back of the helmet. So to do that, I will add a new pin and make it a rectangular pin. I'm gonna increase the height. And position that so it's casting across my audio insert here and helping define some of that shape in the back there. I'll increase the fall off a little bit just to soften it up, and let's add another pin. So the top of the helmet obviously needs a little more light cast onto it, so let's do that with this pin here. So you can see this adding this pin also adds a little highlight to the top of this surfacing here. So this is kind of an important aesthetic to the helmet design. So it's important that you're clearly communicating this form. So I'll bring my fall off down to get a nice sharp reflection. That looks good. So also what I like to do is to introduce some cool and warm values to my HDR. So if I add another pin, basically the rule of thumb is that the ground is going to be a little warmer, and the sky or the ceiling is going to have a cooler value. So let's bring a pin down closer to the ground here and introduce some warm tones here. So usually when I'm working with the HDR editor, I'll have this window in a separate on a separate monitor so I can clearly see what's going on here, but you can see, hopefully you can see there's a little bit of a warm value added there. So what I want to do, this maybe bring my radius down. I kind of want it to follow the same shape as the curvature seen here. So sometimes when working in the HDR editor and adding pins, the light in the background can get a little distracting. So I think I'm going to just change this to a basic color. And for this image, like you saw on my personal display board, I had it on a white background, but then on the newsletter it was on a dark background. So depending on the final medium that you're going to be presenting this image on, usually it's best practice to actually use a similar color. So if it's on a white background, we'll use a white color to make sure we don't have any parts that are falling off here, or any hot spots. And then the same goes if this will be on a black background. You want to make sure that your edges are crisply defined. But let's just use white for now. Okay, and then I'll add my final pin with a cooler value. And increase that fall off to soften it up a bit. And just help illuminate the top of the helmet. Okay, we'll say that's good for now. So, I had some graphics on the final image, and depending on if you'll be using graphics or not, looks like this area might be a little plain, so we could either help that out with some additional lighting or some graphics. So if I have time, hopefully I can add my graphics as labels on there and show you how that process works. So let's go ahead and save this out. And I like to create a separate folder in my library for the custom environments that I have created with the HDR editor. So I'll just put it in there. And as you save that out, it'll improve the quality of that HDR. So maybe you noticed a little jagged line here in this reflection, and as you save that out, it'll generate a higher resolution image to clear that up. So you can see that's nice and crisp now. And we can close out of that. So I think we're at a good point now to maybe stop and ask, see if there are any questions out there. So Josh, are you there? Do you mind stepping in and?
Yes. Well, no, I don't mind at all. There are not very many questions. Rex is using the latest version 4.1 of KeyShot. There's a question about that.
Okay.
There's a question, when you animate a light, why is it so jerky in the animation? I posted this question sometime back, and this is from Bill Gould.
Okay. Well, Bill, nice to have you in here. let's see. When you animate a light, why is it jerky in the animation? Bill, is this your final output, or is this the real-time view of your animation? Maybe we can have Bruno help you out with that. I'm sure he can find that question on the forum and address that. On the final output, okay. Well, yeah, Bill, we'll have Bruno help you out with that. Maybe you can send over a KSP. It should not be jerky, so I don't know if this has happened to you on multiple files or not, but we'll make sure to look at it and have that addressed. Okay.
There's another question about using multiple textures. How do you use multiple textures?
Yeah, so with, let's take a look at, say, our procedural material here. You can see that the plastic material type offers the most amount of texture types available to apply to that material. So if I were to look at my metal material, it's missing a specular map. So it depends what type of material you're using, what textures you have available to apply. So we don't support layering of textures. So if you were to have multiple bump maps layered on top of each other, there are a couple workarounds, but I'd say the best workflow for that is to just create one texture that combines the multiple bump maps. Actually, this leather is a different case because if you notice, there is actually a leather material in the library, so that allows you to have that leather bump and then apply some bump maps or other texture types on top of that, but that's the only material type where you can actually do that. Ray asks if we can do a webinar featuring skin materials and clothing. So yeah, we can definitely address that in the future. James asked if I can show transparency on the visor. Sure, I can show you what this looks like if we were to change it. So since I did already create this material with the texture applied, I'm going to go ahead and save this out to my library so I can easily access it later. So we'll call it the gradient lens and save to the library under miscellaneous. Okay, so if we want to change this to a transparent material, we can do it a few different ways. We can just drag and drop from our library, and say we could choose a glass, but that'll wipe out that gradient that we had applied. Now the glass material doesn't support color maps, so actually what I'm going to do is basically create a custom material. So if I change this to a plastic, it'll retain the color information and that color map that I've already applied, but we can go down to our Advanced tab and introduce some transparency to this material. So we still keep our blue and our purple, but now we can then see through the lens. So it all depends on what you're looking for. Sometimes, it's nice to see some more of this geometry behind the lens. So actually, yeah, that's looking pretty good for now. I think my blue needs to be a little darker. Oops. Bring our color map back, and there we go. So you don't get quite the high level of reflectivity that you did from the metal material, but we can actually adjust our refraction index, increase that to make this material more reflective. So actually, I think I might like this better than the metal. It all just depends on the type of feel you're going for in your scene. Okay, so let's take a look at a render. If we're going to output this, let's talk about what kind of settings we'd like to use to make sure that this is a high quality marketing level image here. So if we go over to our quality tab, you probably know you can choose between maximum time, maximum samples, and advanced control. Maximum time, you set this to any amount of time. Say you have a deadline and you want to get the best quality render possible in 1 hour. Then you can set this to 1 hour, render it out, and you can actually stop the rendering at any time and it'll save it out if you're satisfied with it. The same way for maximum samples mode, you can actually crank this up all the way, send it out to render, and then stop it at any time you're actually satisfied with that rendering. But for advanced control, which is what I use most of the time, I'd say for maximum samples, I use that when working with the area light materials or the light source materials, because they do tend to appear a little better in the real-time view than in the render output. But in this case, advanced control will work fine. For the samples, default of 16 should be fine for this scene. Now, you'd want to increase your samples if you're working with a lot of rough or textured materials. Since we do have some textures in our scene, but only on really the strap and the foam here, we can actually go into this individual material, click on our advanced settings, and increase the samples for that individual material. So that way the samples aren't being calculated for the entire scene, they're only calculated for that material. So that should speed up your render process a little more. I actually want to adjust this material. I'm not exactly happy with it. Get a little more definition of those peaks and valleys, and maybe increase the scale a bit. Okay. So yeah, that's for samples. 16 is fine, and if you do have textures in your scene, you can increase that for the individual material itself instead of increasing it for the entire scene. Ray bounces are going to apply to transparent materials. So we do have this lens here. If we go to our settings tab under advanced, we also have ray bounces here. So this will give you a real-time view of what the ray bounces actually does. So if we only have one ray bounce, you can see that the light does not actually penetrate through the transparent material. As we increase this, it begins to clear up. So the best practice for ray bounces is to actually use the slider in your settings tab and just kind of find out what value or what number you're not seeing any more improvements. So in this case, you know, it's a pretty small number, so 6 will be fine for this scene. Now, anti-aliasing, this is actually a perfect example of where you'd want to increase your anti-aliasing. We have this very high contrast, two parts next to each other here, and you can see there's a little bit of a jagged line. So in this case, yeah, we'll increase the anti-aliasing, and we might want to increase the samples as well when we do increase the anti-aliasing. So the samples and anti-aliasing kind of work together. So when you do increase your anti-aliasing, you might want to increase your samples a little bit. You could also increase just the samples of that individual material here, but to make sure that it's applied around our entire scene, we'll increase the number of samples with our anti-aliasing. The shadow quality, that does add significantly to render time, so you want to be careful when increasing this. I find in most cases the actual self shadows, the shadows cast on the parts, they come out very good quality even when the shadow is down to its default value of 1. It's actually the ground shadow that does have some variation in it. So if we go back to our environment and show the ground shadow, real quick before I change any of my environment settings, I want to go to my camera tab and save this view set out as my hero view set. So now I can change my view, can always go back to my hero view set. Little lag there. Close out of Photoshop. So yeah, ground shadow. If we show our ground shadow and take a look at our ground size, you can see that the shadow is being clipped here by our actual ground size. So to ensure that the ground shadow is the highest quality, you want to reduce your ground size to the smallest value that's acceptable. So there's still a little bit of shadow clipping here, but depending on your camera view, this might or might not be in your scene. So that's just a good practice to make sure your ground shadow is good quality before you go into your render settings and increase that value. But we'll turn those off for now and go back to our saved view set. Well, these webinars sure do go by quickly. We're at 11:09, so I didn't quite get to address VR, so let me quickly do that. If we click on our VR button, we'll bring up the VR wizard, where you can then choose your type of output. And in this case, I'd like to see the full 360-degree view of this helmet. So we could either use a spherical, which will have a bumper once you get to the top or the bottom, or we could use tumble, which you'll be able to actually rotate fully in 360 degrees. So you can just choose the object as our center, or the environment, since I know that I modeled my object on the origin in SOLIDWORKS. Set up our view, then we can preview that view. But in this case, as we preview, this environment isn't quite right for VR. So you might want to use something a little more neutral when creating a VR. So something maybe a little softer, such as one of these light tints. We still get a nice reflection, but it is overall a softer environment. And what I like about the VR preview is that you can actually interactively edit your HDR and your environment while still being able to preview. So in this case, since we will be going 360 degrees around the product, I want to make sure that the bottom or the inside is fully illuminated. So I'll add a pin just to the floor here and increase that just to make sure that all that geometry is visible when we're looking on the underside. And I might not have picked the correct mode, tumble. Let's use spherical. So yeah, now when we look at the underside, we're getting a little more illumination in there. We can actually see what's going on. So I already rendered out an example of this with the labels. So now you have your interactive VR where someone can explore the product in 360 degrees. If you wanted to take this to the next level, you can even add callouts in here. I haven't done this yet, but I'm looking to create a tutorial, a little more advanced tutorial to show you how to do that. But it's pretty simple. For the VR file, you're given all the frames, and what you do is just edit the JPEG or the set of JPEGs and just take it into Photoshop or your photo editing software and just add a call out on that series of images, so that way when you are mousing through this and you get to that frame or that set of frames, you'll actually have that call out showing there. So that's a nice way to kind of deliver some more engaging aspects of the KeyShot VR. Alright, so we are all out of time. Josh, are there any more questions that need to be answered before we wrap this up?
Right now we'll take any questions. You can always stop by the forum or send in questions to us at support. You can find that on the website along with the other webinars in the learning section. We'll be posting this one this week or beginning of next week. That's it. Thanks everyone for joining us again, and we'll see you next time.
Alright, thanks guys. Bye.